My name is Mike Margulies. I'm from a team with Omer called the Global Black Belts. We are part of a field-facing organization that provides deep expertise in areas of analytics. And so we've worked with hundreds of customers, not only across retail, but also across all of the other verticals, to gather requirements and implement analytics solutions across the board with all kinds of flavors of all kinds of technology. So we're happy to share some of those experiences with you and also give you an overview of what it is that Microsoft can offer in and around the analytics platform for retail. So we can start with some sort of generic, on the next slide, some generic, how you doing, Omer? Are you going to be able to advance that slide? There you go.
So Mike, for some reason it's not moving to the
Okay, so I'm going to turn off my camera because maybe I'm distracting you. Let's make sure that this can move forward.
So let me share the control with you and see if you are able to.
Sure.
Switch that.
Bear with us, people, while we work through these technical difficulties.
Mike, where are you based out of physically?
I'm physically in the California, well, in the San Francisco Bay Area. So just north of San Francisco, about 10 miles in Marin County.
Oh, it's beautiful up there. Hopefully the fires have gone down. I
They
don't
have.
hear too much, but that's good news.
Yeah, they have. We've gotten some rain, and I will say I'm originally from the New York area, and so it's really just a pleasure to live where the weather is always beautiful, and it's a very mellow, awesome place to live. So I highly encourage everybody to come out here and check it out. The fires were bad, and now they're much better. It looks like we are advancing. So thank you, Omer, for getting that taken care of. So, you know, in general, what we try to do, and this really spans multiple areas across the retail enterprise, is focus on a couple of different key constituencies. That includes customers, and we're trying to improve the customer experience, not only from a business process support perspective, but from a visualization and user experience perspective. We're empowering employees, specifically the associates that are in the brick and mortar stores or interacting with customers via electronic means, to have a better, more informed experience and bring more service to those interactions. We're able to actually improve the profitability and the business process efficiency across the enterprise. So our platform, which is centered around Synapse Analytics as a sort of a hybrid engine powering analytics, is really targeting all of these different use cases. And we're going to talk about a few of those as we move forward. Next slide, Omer. Thank you. So you can see here in terms of operational efficiencies, empowered employees, customer-centric journeys, there's a number of things that we can do. And we have a number of experiences that during the course of this presentation and maybe in the chat window we can share with you. Next slide. So as you take, for example, a customer experience process flow, and you look at how this has sort of takes the customer through a journey where data is touching that customer at different moments of that process. So beginning with the first interaction where we're actually looking at products, thinking about the way that inventory and inventory visualization and catalogs are displayed to that customer in an online format. There are opportunities to personalize that information, to provide reviews. There's shopping experiences with price comparisons and feature comparisons that are built in to this experience. There's opportunities for chatbots as well as human interaction through chat and other ways of providing personalized assistance. There's demonstrations, there's the checkout process, there's customer service. So as we move through until the transaction is consummated and there are additional recommendations or considerations for follow-on purchases, we can see how the access to data and the power of analytics augments this process and provides much more opportunity for the retailer to not only enhance that individual transaction process flow, but also customer experience, reducing customer churn, improving customer lifetime value, etc. So there's a number of junctures here, but also in employee engagement, also in operational efficiency, which we trace through in putting together analytics solutions for retail. Next slide, please. So if you want to think about the data platform that Microsoft is able to provide, it really has more than analytics to it. So I just wanted to give some context to this overall. We have a long history prior to Azure in the on-prem space. And it has centered to a certain extent around SQL Server in data, but also includes other types of on-prem technologies, including but not limited to Office, SharePoint, and even Dynamics. And so there's a lot of sort of legacy and still some vestigial components like SQL Server 2019 or Azure Arc, where we're able to bring a lot of those technologies into an on-prem environment, but allow it to easily integrate with the technologies we have in Azure. As we move forward from left to right, we see that there's a number of modernization technologies in Azure itself for transactional data management, both in a SQL or relational and in a NoSQL context. So we have Azure SQL Database and SQL Database Managed Instance to minimize the amount of administrative overhead there. We have Postgres and MySQL and MariaDB in Azure as transactional platforms. We have Cosmos for NoSQL. And we have Redis Cache for in-memory caching. So there's a number of sort of very transaction-intensive technologies that we bring to the table, all of which are naturally integrated with the underlying Azure platform, but also have some forward integrations with cloud scale analytics, which is really the focus of our talk today. So what we're able to do with cloud scale analytics is bring data from a number of different sources indicated here on the left. And these can be some of the sources I just mentioned in Azure or on-prem. So regardless of whether these things are sitting in flat files or Netezza boxes or an Oracle operational data store or in another cloud vendor like Salesforce or Workday, all of this data is available to us. It's brought into the environment through a facility called Data Factory. We then can store that information inside of a data lake, which has a number of performance and security related features. We can use, if the use case requires, we can use technologies like Databricks to augment that ingestion process, to do transformations and other kinds of data preparation. And then Azure Synapse Analytics, which we'll talk about in a second, has a number of facilities to increase the time to insight and make it really easy to develop very powerful, multifaceted analytics applications. On the right-hand side, you see the visualization layer with Power BI, but we also support a number of other BI and visualization tools like Tableau, MicroStrategy, Business Objects, Cognos, etc. So suffice it to say that these are the Microsoft technologies, Microsoft first-party technologies, but this is by no means a closed system. And so it's very, very open in any of these areas to include other technologies, partner technologies for Microsoft like Informatica or Talend or Databricks or Matillion or even other data lakes, etc. Okay, let's move on. So if we want to, and we'll just build this out totally, if we want to look at the inside of Synapse, there's some important things that I want to point out here. The first is that Synapse is a wholly contained sort of bicameral system. So it allows for both SQL and analytics as well as Spark-based analytics. So it combines the best of both worlds, both relational data and big data. And it really blurs the lines between these two types of processing for the end user. And so an end user can actually execute queries in a SQL pool or in a Spark pool. They can use SQL or they can use Python or Scala or R. The integration layer is built into this so that not only from source to lake, but lake into the warehouse, we're able to take advantage of Synapse pipelines, which can be easily developed and orchestrated from within this system. We also can take advantage of both a provisioned and an on-demand form factor. And so what that means is if you need a data warehouse to be available worldwide, 24/7, we have very, very cost-efficient mechanisms for making that happen. We also have the ability to run queries in an ad hoc fashion and only charge for the consumption required to execute that query. So as an alternative to a 24/7 warehouse, you could actually execute ad hoc queries and only pay pennies per query based upon the size and the resources required to execute that. From a language support perspective, all of the languages that are written here are supported. And if we continue this build just a little bit, Omer, we'll see the studio layer displayed. And that studio layer contains a number of facilities which are extremely important in comparing and contrasting this system with some of the other systems out there. Specifically, we're able to use data exploration functionality to look at data lake and linked storage systems, so flat files as well as the lake, as well as the data warehouse. And there really are no barriers from a visualization perspective to accessing this storage. An easy right click allows us to query over that storage using notebooks or building scripts in real time. We're able to support multiple languages, as I mentioned before. And so the studio gives us an easy way to explore and query over data. We can also use the studio to develop Synapse pipelines for ingestion and transformation using both codeless as well as code-first approaches. So if you simply want to drag and drop and put some transformation code in there, there's facilities to allow you to do that really, really easily, and then essentially execute on that from within the Synapse environment. You don't have to jump out to another UI to do that with another tool. If you want to use code, you can easily use stored procedures, you can use Python, you can use any number of code forms that are supported by Synapse pipelines to develop and orchestrate those. You can also use management capabilities from within this studio to easily scale up and down, even scale automatically. You can pause and restart clusters, so there's a number of powerful pieces of functionality in there, including workload optimization. So within each cluster, we have the power to be able to allocate resources intelligently so that more important constituencies get priority resources, and that we don't have to rely upon a first in, first out queuing mechanism for allocating resources to different queries. There's a number of ways we can carve up the resources within a particular cluster and even change that up as we move forward. So we have a lot of power and a lot of flexibility in making sure that we take full advantage of available resources within a single cluster without having to spin up additional clusters, and that's a huge, huge price performance advantage for Synapse. We also have the ability to incorporate ML Studio for machine learning and AI into this Synapse environment, and there's additional hooks out to Azure machine learning for doing more intense model development and deployment and testing. And so there's a number, and the last thing that I want to mention is that there's really, really great integration with Power BI so that you can build, edit, visualize, check out the resource consumption for Power BI reports and dashboards, and do that all within, again, the Synapse workspace. So it's a super powerful facility for doing end-to-end development for analytics and controlling the entire analytics environment in a way that's head and shoulders above what any of the competitors can do today. So before we move off of this slide, I just want to reemphasize, Analytics Studio is a multifaceted, pervasive development environment. Both SQL and Spark side by side allow you to run queries across the lake using Spark or across the data warehouse using SQL, and mix and match at your convenience with very little variation in terms of the user experience, so it's very simple to use. These things are tightly integrated with the underlying data lake, and there's a ton of integrations with Azure, for example, in Azure Active Directory or in Azure DevOps. So there's a lot of facilities within Azure that are very, very tightly integrated with the Synapse environment. Let's move on to some proof points here. Okay, so there are some architectures which we have found to be recurring in our work within retail. One of these is omnichannel optimization. So especially now in COVID, we have a great deal of use of alternate channels to brick and mortar and a transition back to brick and mortar. And this is important not only for the customer experience, but also for workforce optimization. So how many people to hire and where to put them, what kind of shifts do we want to run? So there's a number of different factors here, some of which I've illustrated in the previous slides. You know, we can take data in from a number of different sources, including mobile applications or social networking, bring that data into Data Factory, and then store it in the lake where it can be available to Databricks for advanced analysis or directly into Synapse. And then analysis services allows tabular models to prep that data for consumption with Power BI. And so there's a lot of ways to take data from a predictive analytics perspective from Databricks and surface that in a dashboard with Power BI, and also operational analytics from Synapse in Power BI. And so you can co-locate a lot of this data, and it allows for much more powerful optimization of these channels, sometimes in near real time. Let's look at another use case for personalization. This is a common example in retail, and you can see from a shopping experience, both in e-tail perspective as well as in in-apps purchases, for example, or in-app shopping experiences from within Facebook or Twitter, etc. You can bring data into the system using Event Hub. You can use facilities like Stream Analytics to populate Synapse, but also send stuff out to Azure Machine Learning to do advanced analytics. And then again, use Power BI, but also add Azure Logic apps or Azure functions to send personalized recommendations back through the environment to the shoppers in either the e-commerce front end or in those applications, those mobile applications that we mentioned before. So this is another very, very common use pattern. A more traditional use pattern is on the next slide, where we're talking about intelligent supply chain or supply chain optimization. And here on the left, you can see both IoT as well as edge devices representative in a hot path, as well as traditional sort of operational data underlying some of these common ERP applications, whether it's SAP or Oracle or POS systems, etc. Both these hot and cold paths can converge in Synapse, and then using Cosmos DB for NoSQL and for real-time data, we can use that to power combined data again with Power BI and set up feedback loops so that we can pass real-time information back to the various folks who are involved in the supply chain and improve operational efficiencies in that way. And so there's a ton of these types of use cases in the retail space that we have a lot of experience in, and Omer and I are personally involved in a lot of these. Let's wrap up with just a few sort of, okay, let's wrap up with a demo.
So Mike, let's cover the customer use cases. And after that,
okay,
I can move to the demo so that I don't have to come back to the slide.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so let's just talk about this really quickly. As I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, we have experience across probably several hundred retail customers in the last 12 months. And overall, hundreds and hundreds of retail customers who are using one or more aspects of the platform that I talked about before, including Synapse Analytics. And so there are a number of, there's some specific examples actually on the next slide or two that I just wanted to go through really quickly. Walgreens is a customer that I worked very, very closely with. They had a ton of Oracle, of DB2 and SQL on-prem databases. And we're moving from a largely on-prem into a cloud environment. They were looking at a number of different technologies, and specifically, we're looking at Netezza and Teradata, large warehouse implementations of those two, and have been working with us over the past 12 to 18 months to move a huge chunk of this data over into Azure. And there's a number of different ways that we have done this with Walgreens, and Walgreens is allied with Boots in the UK. And so the Walgreens Boots Alliance is the worldwide organization there. And so we've done a phased approach to building out a lot of this analytics functionality, incorporating a lot of the data lake and some of the Spark functionality we've talked about before, some of the Power BI, but other BI tools as well. And there's a huge amount of estate that we have to migrate. And so it's an ongoing process involving a number of different implementation partners, including MCS. The second example that I wanted to show is Columbia Sportswear. And here we had a large Teradata environment that we migrated over. There have been a number of sort of milestones hit on this. And this is a more typical sort of like US only retail use case. It's not nearly as large as the Walgreens implementation has been, but it has been something that we've been working very, very closely with Columbia on. And so we've had great success there. They've been actually able to improve costs dramatically, which was one of the main concerns. Most Teradata customers want to eliminate the high cost of running a very expensive appliance on-prem. And so we were able to actually drive much lower price, much vastly improved price performance with an Azure-based, cloud-based analytics platform than they were experiencing with Teradata. So I think that pretty much ends the discussion on slides. Oh, IKEA is one more, another global customer. These guys took advantage of a much larger portfolio of technologies, and so they really built out a huge transaction and analytics system in the cloud. And this was for all of their store sales and huge levels of transactions. So 400 receipts per second across a number of worldwide stores. So there's a number of those technologies, including Cosmos, Event Hubs, and Synapse, which I mentioned in the hot and cold paths previously. So now I'm going to flip it over to Omer to provide a bird's eye view of what the system looks like. And then I'm happy to take advantage of the chat window to answer any questions. So thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Are you guys still able to view my screen?
Yes, we're all good.
Perfect. Thanks, Ron. So before I start the demo, just wanted to highlight that all of the use cases that Mike talked about require data and supporting tools that can be complex to integrate. You need to be able to handle fluctuating business demands. And this all should come at a price point that makes you, the customer, competitive in your business. So with that, let me move to the demo for Synapse Analytics, which is the system which was basically designed by keeping all of these points in mind. So Mike talked about the Synapse workspace, which is basically your one-stop shop for all of the analytics that you can do in Azure. So in this case, this is the main screen for Synapse Workspace. Just wanted to point out that if you come on this question mark, we have something called Knowledge Center. If you are a customer who is just trying out Synapse, you can actually come in here. You don't need to move any of your own data in. If you go to Knowledge Center, we give you a lot of templates. We give you sample data sets. So without moving any of your own things in, you can make use of the sample data sets, the sample pipelines, data ingestion points, and start trying this platform out. You can also look at documentation from here, some other useful links. But the key thing here is the architecture that Mike talked about. In most cases, the first point is ingesting data. So for quickly ingesting data, you can actually come in here. You can define a source, which is basically your connection where you are going to be pulling the data in from. And in this case, we give you 90 plus connectors. So for example, your data can come in from any on-prem environment. So let's say it can be Netezza, it can be a Teradata environment, SQL Server. It can come in from multiple clouds. So we have built-in connectors for all of these use cases. The good thing is Microsoft owns and provides support for these connectors. So you don't have to think about that. You can just come in, create a connection, define your source, define a destination. So in most cases, what we have seen is customers move their data from an on-prem source, let's say, into Azure Data Lake storage. So you can define the destination, in this case, Data Lake storage. It can be the SQL Data Warehouse or any of the other Azure services, and quickly ingest data. Once your data is in this environment, we give you those two capabilities that Mike talked about. So number one is the provisioned SQL data warehouse. In this case, you can come in, these are tables that exist within the data warehouse. And we give you capabilities so you can come in, you can either consume the data by writing SQL, or if your team is more fluent with, let's say, writing notebooks in Spark or any other languages, we provide you these two capabilities. So in this case, this is the SQL that I previously generated to look at this table. These are the results. This shows you that the SQL ran in 1 second. Many of our customer teams, specifically the data science folks, are interested in looking at things in a charted or visual format. So we give you this capability where you can chart out the data. Previously, the feedback that we got was you had to extract the data, put it into Excel or some other tool. So we brought this capability within the platform. The other capability that we provide is you can view the same table by using Spark on-demand notebooks. So this is the Spark code that was generated by doing the right click on the table. I can come in here right now. I have two on-demand Spark clusters. So I can pick one of them. We give you the capability where you can choose multiple languages in terms of what you want to use to analyze the data. The other options that we provide you is you can actually come in and we give you some flexibility in terms of configuring a session. So depending on your workload, you can have, so in this case, because I'm using this cluster, I don't have the option to increase it, but in terms of executors, you can actually increase the size or take it down depending on how big or small of a workload you plan to run. So with this capability, you can either use SQL or Spark to analyze the data. And this is our provisioned SQL data warehouse. We give you many performance features. Mike talked about workload management, quite a few other capabilities, which in the essence of time, I will not go into. But that also helps with getting predictable performance and predictable costs. The other capability that we provide you is, let's say you have moved your data into your data lake storage. So in this case, I have some data in this folder, which is Twitter data. And I can quickly come in here. I can do a right click on the file. It gives me multiple options where I can either ingest the data directly into my data warehouse from the data lake. I can create an external table. So if I don't want to move the data into the data warehouse, but I just want to consume it from the data lake, I can do that. And then another excellent capability is something that we call SQL on demand. So when I choose that option, it's actually going to create or generate the script for me. The key thing that I wanted to highlight here is you can see that I haven't specified any security clauses in here. So in the back end, because the system is deeply integrated, everything is being handled or run by using Azure Active Directory. So as long as I have access to these files in the data lake storage, I can just come in here, I can do a right click, it will generate the script for me, I can run it. So this shows that it ran in 2 seconds. And this is pretty quick. So this way, I can analyze data that's stored in the data lake store by either using Spark or SQL. So that gives a lot of flexibility to customers where they don't have to learn new languages. They can still use SQL and consume data that's stored in the data lake. The next couple of tabs that we have are you can write SQL scripts here. We give you this capability where you can actually come in, and if you're writing code, we'll give you options where when you're trying to write code. So this is the same capability that we provide with some of our other SQL tools like SQL Server Management Studio. So you can write your SQL script from here. You can write notebooks. So this is the code first experience that Mike talked about, where if your team is very proficient with writing code for ETL, they can come in and they can do that. Again, a lot of flexibility with the languages. And then if they want to write ETL jobs without writing any code, they can actually come in. They can use the drag and drop experience where anyone who even doesn't know how to write code can come in, do joins, and other capabilities to come up with an ETL pipeline. We give you flexibility in terms of monitoring and managing the whole platform. So in this case, I can come in, I can monitor my pipeline runs, which is basically my ETL jobs. I can monitor any of my Apache Spark applications, my SQL requests. So anything that basically ran on the platform, I can come in here and I can view what happened on the platform. And then I can also manage my SQL pools, my Spark pools. So let's say if you want to scale up, scale down, or pause, I can just come in here and I can quickly do that. And just in the essence of time, I would quickly like to wrap up the demo and mention that with all of these things in one place, what this gives in terms of flexibility is your teams don't have to go out of the platform to consume different services. All of these services are deeply integrated. You can just come in this one platform. We have done all the plumbing in the back end so that these work seamlessly together. In this way, all you have to do is just create the main analytic workspace, come in, start ingesting data, bringing that in. Power BI also integrates deeply with the platform. In the essence of time, I couldn't show that as part of the demo, but just wanted to highlight again that everything is deeply integrated